Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of the Dad at Arms podcast. I am your host, Dad at Arms, also known as Colt, and with me today is a very exciting guest. We have comics writer and artist Tim Seeley. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so I guess to start, why don't we go ahead and I'll turn some time over to you and let you introduce yourself, kind of give a little history of what you do.
My name is Tim. I am a comic writer, artist, a professor of cartooning. I live here in Chicago. I've been working in comics pretty much exclusively for about 21 years, and I grew up as a Master Universe fan. The first comic I ever got was a Master Universe comic, so it was always something that I've been passionate about. I'm also a collector of Master Universe stuff. I started recollecting the figures back in 2005, I think, or so, after I had gotten rid of all my stuff when I was a kid. And then I've been collecting it since. And I think I have pretty much the entire vintage line, save a couple of the like European releases.
Right.
I don't have the laser guys. But I have all the old stuff. I also have a lot of other 80s figures. And then I've been working recently, I guess for the last 10 years, I've been working with Mattel doing some comics. I did the 30th anniversary mini comics. I wrote a series of those, and then I wrote Injustice versus Masters of the Universe at DC about 5 years ago, and then I did Masters of the Multiverse about 3 years ago or so, and I'm currently working on the with Dark Horse on Masterverse.
Very cool. Very cool. So, with your history of Masters of the Universe, do you have do you have a favorite character? Do you have a favorite toy? Kind
Yeah, I
of.
have a favorite character for sure. That's Tila. When I was a kid,
Yeah.
uh, I would I think I've always been sort of the same kind of person where I always liked the lady character, both for sort of just liking women as people more, but also because I was always like kind of attracted to shiny big legged ladies, barbarian women and stuff. Beautiful thing. And then I always just loved the idea that she was this kind of kind of a tough, prickly kind of person who kind of was covering up the fact that you know, that she didn't know these things about Prince Adam, and that she's kind of the perfect sort of Lois Lane character to He-Man's Superman. Uh,
Hmm.
I think toy wise, my favorite is Faker. When I was a
Awesome.
kid, I got him for my 7th birthday, and something about just the way that it's just like a beautiful object. It's just blue and orange and kind of inexplicable. He's got this weird sticker of a tape recorder on his chest. It just everything about him is so strange and wonderful, and I always love that toy. And anytime there's any version of Faker, I buy it. I have it's like one of the only ones where I have the classics version and the vintage version and the 2000 version. I have every version of Faker that they've ever made. I think.
That's awesome. No, I'm a huge fan of Tila as well. I think she's my second favorite character after He-Man. And I tell this story a lot, but when I got married, when me and my wife got married, 16 and a half years ago, she knew I was a big He-Man fan. And so I jokingly said, "Hey, we should have He-Man and Tila action figures on top of our wedding cake," just as a total joke. And she's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so I have wedding photos of our, our ceremony and stuff, and He-Man and Tila are right there on top
Very
of our
cool.
wedding cake, and
It's
it was a
awesome.
lot of fun.
My
So
wife and I dressed as for Halloween one year. She went as Tila, and she was very attracted to Tila. But I went as Prince Adam, as in a fusion of Adam and Prince, the singer. So I had a big uh, Jerry curl wig and little goatee and everything. There you go.
oh,
It's
that's awesome.
a moment.
How fun. Uh, so yeah, we all have these great memories growing up with Masters of the Universe. One specific memory I have of the franchise, and this is kind of how I lost my vintage collection. I mean, not kind of, it's exactly how I lost my vintage collection. I'd got in trouble with my parents, and as a result, I got like grounded from my toys for a few days, and so my
Uh,
mom boxed all my He-Man toys up, all my play sets and vehicles and all that stuff, and she put them out in the garage of our house, and she was like, "Okay, when you've learned your lesson, you can have your toys back." In the meantime, my dad was cleaning out the garage, and he was just hauling boxes off, and he ended up taking my box of He-Man toys to the thrift store,
oh no!
and I lost all of them in one fell swoop.
Oh man!
It was it
Oh,
was a sad day.
oh man! I
So that
bet. Yeah, that's terrible. And the fact that
yeah.
you had an accident, it wasn't malicious. It was just a
Yeah, it
goof.
was just an accident. Like, I don't blame my mom. She still feels bad about it. She still hunts thrift stores for me to this day, looking for old
Sure.
He-Man figures. I'm like, you don't have to do that. It was, wasn't, yeah.
Well, in
Yeah,
part
that's
of my affection for the Tila too was when I was a kid. I'd gotten her for a birthday present, and at the time, a boy getting a girl figure was kind of unusual. But I didn't care. I liked her so much. But then it was really hard to, there was. It's not like now where you could go get it on eBay. She was no longer.
yeah.
But my mom was a nanny at the time for a date for a job, and the kid she nannied for, I'll never forget him, Nick. He took my Tila to play with him during the day, which I was like, kind of okay with. But he took her to the grocery store and lost her at Ron's IGA in
Oh
Schofield.
no.
And then I was so mad. I was just, like, and to this day, I think when I see a Tila vintage one, I buy it in part because of the damage from my childhood. So
Yeah.
I'm always like rescuing these Tilas because I was like, well, some kid named Nick will lose her. And then I buy a
Well,
lot of them.
yeah, you gotta have that backup just in case.
So it was, it's funny because of our generation being so kind of, we're the first sort of heavily marketed to toy generation. And so these things, if you're a certain kid, these were very important to you. And there was like, there's no doubt that that was traumatic for me because it did sort of shape some part of my life. This loss of this stupid $5 plastic figure that, yeah, just kind of changed everything.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So, getting into your work specifically with Masters of the Universe, you talked about the 30th anniversary mini comics, and those were the ones that were packed in with the classics
Yeah,
figures,
yeah.
is that right?
Yeah, there was one that was like it was kind of picking up on the Hero comic that had originally came out, and then the whole Powers of Grayskull line, which had Hero and Eldor and Tyrannosaurus and stuff. So I did those issues, which kind of was like a time travel sort of thing. Wrote those with Scott, who was the kind of the brand manager at the time, Scott Neelick.
Hmm.
And then, for me, it was coming full circle. Like I said, the first comic I'd ever gotten was a Master Universe mini comic. And then one of the first sort of full size monthly comics I got was when they did a crossover with Master Universe and Superman.
Yeah.
It was sort of like a promotional thing. It was like, it appeared in issues of like Firestorm and stuff. And then there was an actual issue of a DC Spotlight, I think it was. I have it on my wall over there. But so for me, it was like coming full circle. So the opportunity to write those, I was like, I'm not going to turn that down. It was via Dark Horse at that time. They were doing the mini comics and such. I also have written the art of Masters Universe with my brother at Dark Horse,
Yeah.
which that's the sort of full size book. Um,
I
so
gotta Let me bring up
so
a picture of that.
yeah,
This one right
that one.
here.
The first of the sort of high end hardcover books that Dark Horse was doing with Mattel. And my brother and I wrote that together. It was one of the most fun I've ever had making anything. We were doing meetings at bars and just going through all these files that we had gotten from Mattel, and we were finding some of our own, and it was so much fun to sort of, try to identify stuff. And we were kind of fortunately, my brother and I are pretty much experts at Master Universe art, so we would be able to be like, oh, that's Earl Norem, and that's you know just whatever packaging that's Errol McCarthy. We were pretty good at that, so we had a blast doing it for sure. And
That's
other thing
awesome.
I forgot, I worked on the She-Ra cartoon too. I did the brand Bible for DreamWorks. So
Oh,
might as
okay.
well Master Universe stuff I did, but my brother and I did the She-Ra brand Bible that we gave to Andy Stevenson and the team so that they could write that series.
Okay. Well, that's very cool.
Yeah,
Um,
should I forget it? That's what happened.
yeah. With the art book, when you're going through something, or when you're compiling something that big, that where you're kind of pulling from all this history and all these legacy pieces and stuff. Was there anything that you uncovered in that process that you didn't know before that just kind of stood out to you as like a real cool
Yeah, I mean,
moment for you?
we definitely found stuff that we were surprised by. I'm trying to think of, I remember at the time we had gotten the photos of the original, yeah, the mock-up figures that they had done. So that was the first time I had seen, the sort of barbarian He-Man that they were used originally, had the helmet and stuff. The
Yeah.
actual mock-up figure, seen some of that stuff. I remember we got some, and I'm going to forget the name of it, but there were these painted Italian or Spanish images of Skeletor and Evil Lyn, and they were just beautiful by a Vampirella artist, Murato, I think they were, if I'm remembering correctly, that I had never seen before. Some of that sort of international stuff, which was, at least up to the time, things that weren't sort of publicly available. And then I mean, most of it we kind of knew. There was a couple of character designs that we had requested that we had heard rumors about. Like, do you have the design for this? We've heard about this character, and in a lot of cases, Mattel did have them, and in some cases they didn't, which was a bummer. But that part of the section of the book was a lot of. It was cool that it existed. I think we were worried that a lot of that stuff was lost. Um, but most of the, at least certainly like the He-Man magazine stuff, the animation designs, that was all stuff that we were actively looking for, and were happy that Mattel had copies of it.
That's awesome. It's a great book. I love just going through it, and I mean, it's just this massive picture book that you get to flip through and look at all these cool images and concepts and posters and
It is to this day the best reviewed thing I have on Amazon. So there you go.
oh wow.
All the stuff I wrote, comics and everything else, that one is the best.
The art book is the best one, huh? Um, with the comics themselves specifically, you've written some, in my opinion, some really cool additions to the MotU legacy. Uh, you did the mini comics that you talked about, but talking about the Injustice versus Masters of the Universe comic.
Yeah. Uh,
Um,
yes. Well, I mean, it was
yeah,
one. The gig was at the time I was working with DC. I just finished up, or maybe I was just finishing it off. I just done Rebirth Nightwing with DC. I had a really good relationship with DC, and they were looking to do something after the end of the series that Rob had done, Rob David, which was they had sort of done the Infinity stuff, and they were trying to think of something else to do because that series very much wraps up. And so there was a
yeah,
list of things that they were considering doing, and they asked me if I would be interested in doing any of those, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take any of that. Sounds awesome. And then after they kind of ran through it with Mattel and DC, they said, well, we're going to do Injustice versus Master Universe. And I was like, wait, what? Was that on the list? I don't remember that. And because at the time I was like, how am I going to do that? I have no idea. But uh, but I obviously, I mean, one of the first comics I ever got was He-Man and Superman. So I definitely was like, well, I have to make this work
yeah,
because I can't, I can't not do it. Um, and in the end, I mean, I think it when it came out, I remember people being like, kind of having my reaction, like, what are you guys thinking? These things are not alike at all, which is how we ended up approaching it. Like, yes, exactly, they are not alike. And so the pitch I came up with was in Injustice, the universe, when you don't have Superman
hmm
because he's gone bad, well, so the universe sort of supplies you with a replacement, and that is He-Man. And so, he's got the pure heart, and he's good, and he shares his power,
hmm
even though he has this great amount of it. And so, uh, and that pitch I think really worked well. There was one thing we had kind of talked about various versions of it, kind of doing like Injustice version of Eternia, where He-Man was the ruler, and I just felt like if Superman goes bad, He-Man can. But we did use parts of that because we set it up in the beginning where Faker has taken that role. He's essentially this
yeah,
sort of despotic, uh, He-Man, and that's the sort of fight is that they've got to free, and then that sets He-Man up to be aware that there's Superman on Earth and he's a tyrant, and this is where his mother is from. So I got to work with Freddie Williams on it. It was amazing collaboration between us. I'd already known Freddie's work. I knew Freddie's a guy. He had done Thundercats, He-Man, which I loved. And so,
Hmm.
that project was just so much fun and such a surprise. I think, probably to me and the readers, because I think it really holds together. I think the themes really hold up, uh, and we basically went for broke. We're like, we're gonna include everything we possibly can, like the Superman using the technology from the Brainiac stuff to create this sort of Suicide Squad, um, and kind of set us on up all these crazy things. I knew I had to have a scene where He-Man fights Lobo, even if it was really brief. There's just all these sort of things. I was like, we have to get these in there, and at the end, I think we have this big brawl between the DC characters and the Master Universe characters, and it's just like ramming your toys together. But I felt like
Oh yeah,
keeping all those things, but then having it be thematically on point and just being about the abuse of power. Um, and I kind of felt like the world in various countries, including our own, was going through a situation of abuse of power at the time. So I really felt like, I could make something that resonated with me and also had a bunch of cool, colorful toys being slammed together.
yeah. I like, there's a lot of cool moments in that book, but I think one of my favorite parts is when, He-Man goes out to get a look at the world that his mother is from. He kind of sneaks out under Batman's radar, and you see him. He comes across. There's a woman who tries to commit suicide by throwing herself off a building, and he catches her and saves her, and has a just a sweet pep talk with her about resilience and inner strength, and then Bane comes into the picture, and you see this amazing shot of He-Man and Bane fighting, and then it goes immediately from that encounter to He-Man returning, to the Resistance base, and he's got Tila's snake armor that
Yeah.
he takes from
Oh,
Copperhead, and he's got the battle armor on.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
'cause, like, battle armor is my favorite He-Man variant. I love Tila and her snake armor, and I was like, this is incredible. Like, it was just such a cool way to reference those iconic looks for those characters. So that was definitely one of my favorite moments in that
Well,
book, is just seeing those
I
designs.
Well, I think I learned about working at when I was working at DC is if you can come up with sort of anything, there's always a character somewhere that'll make it work. So I knew I was like, I gotta have a scene where He-Man gets some kind of snake armor, so Tila could wear. Is like, yeah, snake armor, snake armor. What DC character has snake armor? Hey, there it is. There's Copperhead. There you go. And so it's kind of. I think it was James Tyner or Scott Snyder taught me that at DC is like, if you can't use one character in this giant superhero universe, there's one that will fit the place. Like if you find, oh, I can't use Penguin here. Well, there's another character, and so I learned that, and I knew that we could get away with figuring out some kind of version of that. And then the idea of the shifting sort of armors being that thing that changes into the He-Man battle armor suit. It's like, well, it's got to be a big dude, so it's got to be Bane. I
Yeah.
didn't know Freddie would draw Bane so much bigger than He-Man, but it looks cool. So it works really
Yeah,
well.
it was really cool. I would love to see action figures based on those comic designs, because they're beautiful.
Yeah, that's the bummer is it's, it'd be a double license. So, and Mattel
Yeah,
no is doing the primary DC line. So,
right. It's a
yeah,
little bit tougher to make those things happen.
yeah, exactly.
Uh, um, I think what resonates about that storyline too is it's kind of that question we're always asking ourselves as kids. Like, who's the strongest character? Is it He-Man? Is it Superman? Like, who wins in a fight? We did see it a couple of times before. In that original comic from the '80s where they had their crossover, and then again where they in the 2012 comic run, there was a portion of that storyline where they go to Earth and clash with the Justice League. But
Oh
it's
yeah,
always, yeah, to me it's always fun to see, to pit these characters against each other and see what comes of it. And it's neat that the central conflict of that is, absolute power corrupts. So who's there to balance it out?
yeah.
And
Well, and I
so,
think that's I think there's a cynicism to injustice, which I get, and I work on stuff with NetherRealm, so I love those guys, and I think even there, like sort of the idea that Superman goes bad for any reason is a tough sell. I think
yeah,
and so we had to make the story about that. It's got to be what isn't sort of inherently flawed with with this setup that we can make this work. So um, because I mean, I think the point of Superman is supposed to be no, there is someone who can be absolutely powerful and still absolutely good, and the there is this, and again, like you'll see it in the Zack Snyder movies where it's like, no, that can't be possible, and I find that so cynical, and it bores me personally. So I didn't want to. I just want to do something different with that, and keep it. The heart of Master Universe is about that. He has all this
Yeah.
power, but he shares it, right? He
Hmm.
doesn't afford it. It's not about him. It's about you, and it's about all of us. And that's a great story for kids, but it's also something I wish adults would remember sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of times we focus too much on the grim, dark version of things that we kind of forget that it's okay to still be hopeful about our heroes. And
Right.
yeah, I mean, and that's He-Man. He's the ultimate hope.
Yep.
Um, so I'm a huge fan of the Injustice games, and ever since I read this book, I've been hoping and hoping that somehow we get He-Man characters in the next Injustice game. Is that another thing that would be tied up with rights or anything like that?
It was definitely discussed. I mean, that was part of the reason that this was on the table, if I remember,
Oh,
because that was. I just don't know. And again, video games is tough because of how long it takes to design stuff, and then by the time that you've
mhm.
got, so I don't remember why that didn't end up going through, but at some point it was on the table enough that that's why the initial concept existed.
Okay.
I and at this point, Injustice. You know, will there be another game? Those are questions.
Right.
So I don't know if that's a thing going forward that would happen, but it'd be cool as hell. I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not a huge video game guy, just because I have no time.
Mhm.
But that would be a fun, just to see those guys moving around would be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Uh, moving on from Injustice, we can talk about your other book, the Masters of the Multiverse. This came out in 2020, and this is another one. I think outside of the main 2012 comic run for Masters of the Universe, I think Multiverse is probably my favorite comic involving the Masters of the Universe because it's just such fun. Like you bring all these different versions of He-Man together and make a cohesive story about it. And just this idea of an evil He-Man going from universe to universe collecting power swords. I mean, it's pretty metal.
Yeah. Yeah. When that was another one that we discussed because it was, I think it was in the earliest iterations of what they were thinking about doing with the line. So in a way, it seems kind of like the way that Masterverse came about was a little bit inspired by, or the other way around, that the idea that they would do something with kind of a multiversal way. In part because the classics line had been like, here's one universe in which everything is contained, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so that was the way that was approached. And then the new approach was going to be like, well, what if these are sort of we can keep them a little bit separate? They're going to be their own places, and we can keep them in the style of the way that they were originally conceived, so that there can be a very kid friendly Masters universe, and there can be sort of more science fiction version, and there can be more of a fantasy version because it's such a flexible universe and flexible story. So and really a flexible character, and so that was kind of the approach to that one. And after I'd finished Injustice, I had talked to Rob and I talked to DC. It's like, if you do something else, like let me know. And when they said, "Well, we're kind of thinking of doing a multiverse," I was like, "Yep, you have to ask me." And so they kind of said, "Well, we just don't know what the villain would be." And I immediately said, "Well, anti-human. It has to be anti-human. You got to
mhm,
be, got to do." And they were like, "Oh, that's really compelling. That's fun." And we just had to figure out a way to bring that together. And one of the things Rob and I had talked about was, well, if Skeletor's not the bad guy, he definitely has to be in it. I was like, well, what if he's He-Man? That was my pitch, and they're like, oh hell yes. So uh, you know, it, that's one of the things I've always really liked about working with Mattel is I can just kind of throw these things out, and they are really supportive. Like they'll be like, oh, that's interesting. How can we make that happen? What is the they're not a big no company. I rarely get no from Mattel. I get a lot of like, well, how would that work?
yeah,
Which is
yeah.
cool. But
That's
of the
awesome.
things I've done, that one is it's got the most me in it for sure because it's all the things I loved about the Filmation cartoon and all that. and the big cosmic stuff, and it's also, you know, unabashedly like, let's do Adventures of He-Man, Space He-Man. Let's do it and let's make it cool and let's remind people how great that idea is, and let's do the mini comics, which are my
Yeah,
favorite.
yeah.
All the Master Universe stuff is the original. For they're not even mini comics; they're like storybooks, really.
Hmm.
Uh, the ones that Don Glut and Alfredo Alcala did. And I was like, let's make sure we do a universe where nothing happened beyond those mini comics, and let's revisit that world.
Yeah. So there's a moment that there's a few moments in this book that I kind of want to ask you about, since I have you here. I talked a little bit about this with Tim Sheridan. I had an interview with him a few weeks ago, and we were just kind of talking about Revelation and the process of writing the comics for Revelation, and I asked him about the relationship between Adam and Tila, and how important that was for the Revelation story. Because to me that was kind of the underlying theme of the entire thing is
Sure.
how they feel about each other. And one of my favorite things about the multiverse book is there's multiple times in that book where it's stated, He-Man have a soft spot for Tila's.
Mhm.
And as a huge, huge fan of He-Man and Tila, and specifically their, romantic relationship, what was that like for you? Like what brought that about? About I guess let me rephrase that. To me, it seemed like when you have a multiverse, there's got to be certain anchor points
Yeah.
or constants,
Right.
across the multiverse, and this seemed like one of them
Absolutely.
to me.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we kind of kept going back to, and Rob and I would sit down and talk about how we do this. Like, well, what are the consistent things, and what are the things that can change? And we kind of felt like, if we're going to do uh, the points of this, where I think are the most appealing and the most interesting, and certainly the kind of Lois Lane Clark Kent relationship between He Man and Tila is one of them, right? The can't must, right? I have to
Hmm.
be in, but I can't tell Tila, and that's such a great source of drama, right? Like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
he if he tells her, then she knows the secret. She's no longer Adam's bodyguard. She's put in danger. A whole host of reasons why, and it's just a great sort of source of I call it a story engine. It's something that keeps churning out possibilities, and that is one of them. So we wanted to make sure that we did that for, especially on emotional beats, because when the Chibi He-Man dies,
Hmm.
he sort of reveals that to Tila, that he had this relationship. Tell my Tila, how I feel about her. Again, it's a great sort of emotional moment, and something you didn't expect from that character in particular, because he's supposed to be the sort of silly cartoon one. Um,
Yeah,
which is from the video game that they did. It was such a nice design. It's like, I got to use that. But that sort of those things help us to get to the emotional moments. Here's the things that are conflicts for these characters, and how do you play them up, and you see it reflected on the other way with Keldor, this version of Keldor, and Lynn, right? So they've got
yeah,
sort of a
yeah.
similar, but it's inverted, and so
Hmm.
that kind of had to be part of the story as well.
Yeah. And I like how it kind of brings it full circle, because in the beginning he's not really ready to have a serious relationship with her, but by the end of the story he's like all in, and they're finally kind of committed to each other in a sweet way.
And it was
So
the in person is that she knows everything about him except who he is. He doesn't know who he is. So, it's sort of him having to figure out who he is before he can go to her. So it's the
yeah,
inverse of the other relationship, which is, a dramatic twist that you can use to get interest out of the story.
yeah, for sure. No, it's a lot of fun. Um, with I think that's all of the questions I have regarding your past work.
Sure.
Um, why don't we go ahead and talk about your upcoming Masterverse comics?
Sounds good.
The first issue releases this month, February 15th.
Oh, really? That's
I've
holy shit. I got
it
2 weeks.
Yeah, right around the corner.
Yeah.
Um, so Dark Horse was nice enough. They sent me the first three issues,
Oh,
and
wow. Great.
I was able to read through them last night, and they were a lot of fun.
I don't
So
think
I
so you're doing better than me. I have the first one
oh
in the PDF.
Nice. So I don't want to reveal anything I'm not supposed to reveal.
Sure.
And you probably know that game better than anybody. But just in a general sense, let's kind of talk about, why this series exists. And it's obviously tied in with the new toy line that Mattel is doing with their Masterverse figures. A lot of those designs are showing up on toy shelves, and then we see them in these comics. Um, what was the idea for this? What brought this about?
Yeah, I mean the main there was two main drivers, and again, this was another one that is it's completely Rob David's baby. So he came up with the idea for a series to do this, and he also came up with a lot of the talent they wanted to work with. So the reason to do it was one, let's showcase some of these designs as they don't have a previously existing story. Most of them are sort of homages maybe to something, but they're also like the idea was let's give the coolest toys, but we don't know what the story is 100% yet. And so,
Okay.
so we have this cool the demon mage Skeletor as it was in the original designs, and we have this Viking as we called in the original designs, He-Man, and all this sort of characters, and Battle Armor He-Man, which at the time, they were just cool designs for toys.
Yeah.
So the part of my job then was like, well, what's the story about this, and how can we figure out a great artist or that would be perfect to meld with this idea? So, we knew Rob was like, we have to get Sergio Aragonis on a story. We have to. And Sergio is one of my favorite cartoonists of all time. He's also one of my favorite people. If you ever meet him, he's like the most charming, coolest guy ever. Sing songs to your wife kind of guy. True. And so we were trying to think of, well, what's the story for this guy? And so what's the story? And it was really just like a fan jam, I guess I would call it. It was Rob saying, "Well, I'd like to do something with this guy," and I'd say, "Oh man, let's do something with this cartoonist." And we knew, okay, we got to do a horror story with Kelly Jones, right? We have to.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
we have to do it. And so it was really just like sort of flexing. One of the things about Master of the Universe I think is so important is that it is many things, right? There is
Yeah. Yeah.
science fiction aspects to Master of the Universe. There's fantasy aspects. There is superhero aspects. There is comedic aspects. And let's dive into those and really push those because they will define this particular set of toys that we get to play with. In this case, literally, because most of these end up being Masterverse figures. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, and but we really also wanted to really play on this the overarching thing, which was what are the constants of He-Man across all of these worlds, which is something we talked about for Masters of the
Mhm.
Multiverse. And so we had that frame be essentially the sort of Job story, right? It's God and the devil betting uh, over this man's life, and so in our story, it's and that was Rob's idea, which I thought was awesome. It's Zodak and Sorceress because
Yeah.
Zodak, who keep the balance of the universe, says, "I don't think." And this basically takes place in the Revelation universe in the beginning, which is, Zodak comes to Sorceress and says, "This guy is unbalancing the forces, and so I think we need to take him out." And the Sorceress is like, "Well, let me show you what he does in these other universes." And so she kind of gives him this tour, and it's it sets us up for this big epic, which clearly has these kind of you know connotations of other great big stories like this, like the Book of Job and all this other sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, where it is set in the Revelation, continuity, is it? Were there any ever discussions about how to tie it specifically to Revelation or Revolution, or is it just kind of a standalone thing?
Kind of. It it doesn't need to tie in too much, but you'll see some moments in there that some of the characters and stuff it'll make sense to why we chose it. But I don't want to give anything about Revolution away. So,
Sure.
uh,
Sure.
but yeah, there's reasons, but also for one of the reasons we want to do is we had Eddie who designed all the Revelation characters, and we thought, well, it'd be so cool if he drew it because he's a comic book artist as well, and so we get to see him do the designs that he made for the show, but we'll get to see him do it in a comic book form.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
get to do some characters he hadn't drawn. He had never drawn Zodak. He had never drawn somebody else that's in the story that I won't tell you just who yet.
Okay. Well, it's a lot of fun. I've liked I like what I've read so far. I'm excited to see the rest of it. Is there? This is a four issue miniseries. Is that correct?
Yeah. 4 issues, 8 separate. sort of worlds of He-Man, eight He-Man stories. But obviously, and you've read it, I think if you see issue two, He-Man is not actually in one of them. The Man at
Hmm.
Arms one. In that story, we
Yeah.
sort of picked this world where He-Man and Skeletor seem to have either destroyed each other or they've disappeared, and so now the attorney is kind of left dealing with the aftermath of that. And so in that story, a Man at Arms who's been kicked out of Eternos because of lying about who He-Man was, he's now a detective, and his assistant, his girl Friday, is Eva Lynn, and that one is so that one doesn't have He-Man in, but it's set in a sort of world inspired by that. So you get this sort of like uh, crime noir gumshoe pairing of those, and then we also get to do a dive. We'll pick up some of the existing stuff. We're going to do a story that'll involve um, the Netflix animated characters, and
Okay.
so yeah, lots of fun stuff in that book.
Very cool. Are there any plans for more issues beyond these 4 issues, or is this
It'll depend
are
on
you
sales
pretty
for sure. But I have another. Yes, we have another way to do this. We've talked about it being like a series of series, if it's something that people would be interested in. Um,
cool?
and it's certainly, I mean, I think in the end, this is after I finished this one, I was like, oh, this is a thing I could do forever. I could just do these short stories and then bring them together, and it yeah, so much fun, and there's so much potential, and there's so many toys. I mean, that's one of the things. I go now to the Target by my house, and there's all these Masterverse figures coming out. I'm like, oh man, I want to do this Stratos, and I want to do this, this Roboto, and I want to do all like. There's so much cool stuff. Like, how can we not keep coming up with stories for it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one of the great things about Master of the Universe is the toys are just so eye-catching and so imaginative. And you kind of talked a little bit about it with Faker, why that's your favorite toy. It's just it some of them just jump off the shelves at you.
Yeah,
We all have our personal favorites, but I mean, there's a whole catalog of fantastic characters and designs, and it ranges from humans to monsters to ghosts. It's a little bit of everything.
I mean, and that's one thing what I keep coming back to with Mattel and this stuff is, they're designed to be toys first. They are toys. They're 5.5 inches tall, and they are just meant to be bought as toys. But the designs for them are so good that they're evocative of like something to everyone, which I think is one of the big strengths of Master Years is that one kid picks up Triclops and sees this, another kid picks up Triclops and sees something else, and it encourages you when you're a kid to sort of make these stories for this little chunk of plastic because it's so cool and so evocative, and it's sort of like something you've seen, and it's sort of like something you haven't, and I think that that's always been this really it's what keeps Master Universe going after all this time is that it's open to interpretation. It relies to some degree on your version of the canon, whatever that is. It doesn't matter. When you're a kid, if you were playing with your He-Man guys and you're like, you know what, Trapjaw is the main hero and everybody else is the bad guy. You can do that, and there's a perfectly reasonable way for that to be translated to you because of if how he looks is so cool to you that he's a good guy. Good enough. And so we
Yeah,
really try to make sure that that's part of everything we do with the Master Universe is just it's sort of about the way you interact with it.
very cool. Um, yeah, I think you've answered all my questions. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but where can people find you on social media and stuff like that to interact and follow you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Hackin Tim Seeley on account of my book Hack Slash. I'm on Instagram at Tim Seeley, just my name with an at in front of it. I'm not. I'm actively trying to avoid all other social media, but you can find me at my website, also timseeleycreative.com, and post art and stuff I've done for creative designs, consultations, comics, everything else. And if you're in Chicago and you're interested, you can always take my classes at Columbia College Chicago. Teach cartooning and concept art. So happy to spread
Awesome.
the love for nerdy stuff to the next generation.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Tim, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me. This has been great. Ever since I've read your comics, I wanted to pick your mind and chat
Sure.
with you a little bit. So
Exactly.
this is
I could
kind of
all day. So usually I like to have a cocktail in my hand, but
a
without so.
yeah. Well, this has been nice. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Ben.
Um, for everybody else watching out there, thanks for tuning in. This has been the Dad at Arms podcast, and we will see you next time.